Welcome to the Nonprofit Edge, a webinar series to promote purpose in practice. Each week, this webinar series features an extraordinary individual that provides valuable and impactful services, helping to transform the capabilities of their nonprofit clients. Join us as we explore a variety of topics, all vital to the success of nonprofit organizations. Learn and grow from the experience and expertise of our featured guests. Without further delay, let's introduce you to the host of the Nonprofit Edge webinar series, Chris Looney.
Welcome, everyone, to Fulcrum's The Nonprofit Edge, a webinar series to promote purpose in practice. Today, we have a special guest, the president of Sterling Search, Sarah Agee. Hello, Sarah. How are you today?
I am wonderful, Chris. All the better for seeing you today. Thank you
Oh,
for
you're so
inviting me.
glad to have you and appreciate your willingness to share your expertise with our audience of nonprofit leaders. I know many of them don't know your background and the specifics of the firm of Sterling Search. So if you wouldn't mind, start with a little bio about yourself and then maybe tell us a little bit about Sterling Search.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. It's very nice to be here with everyone today, and I'm sure I know many of you that will be viewing this. My background is I came from a little island called England and arrived here 30 years ago. And my background has always been in talent acquisition, first in staffing agencies, and then when I got here, moved to Korn Ferry International, which was my first experience and wonderful experience in the executive search practice, and really where I learned my trade. And there I fell into the nonprofit sector and fell in love with nonprofit search. I mean, just working with wonderful board members and executive leadership and their passion for their missions, there was no way I was going to do anything but nonprofit search. And so I started Sterling Search over 20 years ago now.
Okay.
And we only do nonprofit search. We're based in Costa Mesa. We're a small but mighty team of 6, and all of our recruiters formerly come from the nonprofit sector. Most of our searches are usually executive directors, CEOs. We do a lot of fundraising positions, and then we do some other C levels like chief financial officer, chief program officer, HR, etc. And everyone on our team loves the work we do. We're impassioned by, I think the reward for us is when we see somebody in the position really make an impact in the nonprofit they're in, and really seeing the results of the work that they're doing. So for us, that's the rewarding piece.
That's great. Well, I know
Yeah.
you have a sterling, no pun intended, reputation out there and have placed hundreds, if not thousands, of executives over the decades.
Right.
So I know you have seen a lot and experienced a lot of change in hiring in the nonprofit field over the last several decades, and probably even over the last 6 months to a year.
Right.
But talk to me a little bit about some of the changes that you've seen in the executive search field and in
Right.
hiring generally at the C-suite level over the past few decades.
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. I started in the executive search practice in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that was before we had all the technology we have today.
Interesting.
So in those days, I was working at Korn Ferry, and it was all about the traditional networking. Like everyone I met wanted to meet my partner that I worked for, because they felt if they met the partner, they would be open to more opportunities. So that sort of old school networking is still really valuable today. But we move a lot faster with the tools we have today. And so what we've seen change is really a couple of things. I think today people or our nonprofit clients and our candidates want to work with people who specialize in a certain area. They want the search consultant to be very knowledgeable of the space and the community with which they're in. So I think that's a big change. Whereas years ago, you were kind of a generalist nonprofit search consultant. Today, they really want that specialist knowledge, both sides, candidates and clients. And then on the speed and the technology, I mean, quite frankly, if we're all a friend of LinkedIn, if you're not on LinkedIn, I mean, that's how we can find people much faster on LinkedIn than in any other environment, and it can be very specific how we find our individuals. So as a result of that, the market these days is looking for more speed in delivery of our services than it used to be. And I think just in general with the tools that we have today, when I started, we were faxing resumes over.
Right, right.
That isn't the case anymore. So really, the other thing that has been particularly prominent in the last few years is, the need for a diverse candidate slate. And what's really interesting, and we've in the nonprofit sector, you want that. You want your board to represent, your staff to represent the community you're serving. So
Right.
that is tremendously important to our nonprofits. We do have to be very careful, though. We belong to a network of nonprofit search consultants, so where we are given our legal update every 6 months and best practices. And we have to be really careful because although we target, because we do sourcing to target specific candidates for our clients,
Sure, sure.
we have to be careful that we don't discriminate based on race, gender, anything else. And now
Yeah.
it used to be called reverse discrimination. Now it's just called discrimination. So
Mhm.
even though we target a diverse base, we have to put candidates through an equitable process that is free from discrimination, which means we evaluate candidates based on their competencies, experience, etc., and fit within the organization. So although we've been very successful in bringing a diverse slate of candidates to our clients, the ultimate final decision is not based on that. It's based on competences for the job. And we have to be very careful. We advise our clients accordingly on that, or we could all be done for discrimination. So that's become more prevalent, I think, in recent years.
Yeah, yeah, I totally understand that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the current environment. And I know times might be challenging right now, but that seems to be a very common refrain. Every um, new season presents new challenges, but old is new and new is old and all of these things. But
Yeah,
talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing these days in
yeah,
hiring in the nonprofit space.
yeah. You know, um, we've been through it all. We've been through different markets. I mean, I went through the bubble of 2000, the internet bubble. I've been
Yep.
through 2008, COVID, and, we're in a bit of a different world today too, with all the government funding debacle that's impacting a lot of our nonprofits today.
Right.
So, although today is a different climate because nonprofits are really having a terrible time making decisions right now because they're very uncertain and they're doing reorgs as opposed to hiring. So we are seeing a slowness in the market, but
Interesting.
we've seen that before. I mean, we've been through it all before.
Right.
What I will tell you is there is a perception that in a market where, there's perhaps more candidates available because there are layoffs happening right now, that it would be easier to find top talent. And I can tell you that that is never the case, especially for fundraisers. Um, there's a
Right.
supply and demand, and there's never enough supply for the demand. I will tell that is always the case. And I say supply, I mean supply of really strong, accomplished fundraisers. And so what some people perceive in the industry, oh, we don't need to go to search because there must be tons of people in the market right now.
Oh,
We
good,
don't
right.
need a search firm to source talent from us. Unfortunately, what we see in those times is that, good people stay where they are until the market settles a little bit. They don't want to
Mhm.
move during these times. So we still have to headhunt to find those really strong candidates and encourage them to move. So, the market's changing a little bit, but at the end of the day, good talent is always for nonprofits is always hard to find, and don't be fooled by this market.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's incredible advice. I mean, I think it was very interesting for me to hear how candidates and organizations think in these very unstable, tumultuous times, right? Sort of
Right,
wait and see, let's see how things shake out, the slowness of this or that, the
right,
reorg, as opposed to hiring new individuals to fill particular
yeah.
roles, which isn't great. It isn't great, but it's a season that we're in, right?
Yeah, it is a season, and I mean, season also impacts compensation too.
Okay.
Um, we saw, after COVID, the market was so fluid. When everyone went back to work, it was just really fluid. The market, everyone was moving. They'd been sitting in COVID for a long time, and now they were ready to move.
I
And
see.
compensation went sky high.
Got
Uh,
it.
and then that sort of settled down over the last couple of years. But compensation, even in this market, it may taper off a little bit, but I don't think it's going to change dramatically. Again, it's supply and demand. That's the key to this. If you want top talent, you got to pay for it. Whether
Yeah.
it's a small market or a busy market, you've still got to pay the top for the top talent.
Can you repeat that so people hear that?
If you're good, go for the money.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I just think that's such an important lesson for not necessarily only the nonprofit leaders themselves to understand, but board members, hiring managers,
Yeah,
those that put together nonprofit organizational budgets. If you want top talent, you're going to have to pay top dollar. And
yeah,
top dollar doesn't necessarily mean the equivalent of what you would pay someone in the for-profit world, but
right.
it's still more than you would probably expect given this scarcity mentality that everyone brings to the nonprofit space.
Right, exactly. And I think that the the biggest issue I think for nonprofits is this is self-serving, but it's the truth. If you don't headhunt for your talent, you won't get a good talent pool. And if you hire the wrong person, it sets back your organization at least 2 years. Because it
Good.
takes a year to figure it out and it takes a year to reorganize and rehire.
Yeah.
So, you've got to look at the bigger cost and impact on your organization. And the other thing I think when using search is it's so important to look at your strategic plan. Um, and sorry, Chris, I'm going off on another tangent here, but I really do think
Doesn't feel like a tangent. No,
it's
it doesn't
just
feel like a tangent at
so
all. It feels
important.
very interconnected. So,
Yeah.
please finish the thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of time I always say, and particularly I'm talking about CEOs and executive directors, a lot of times we get hired because somebody's retired, somebody hasn't worked out, and it's really a time for reflection about where you want your agency to go because there are different CEOs. There's turnaround CEOs, there's stabilizing CEOs, there's fundraising CEOs, which quite frankly costs more than non-fundraising CEOs.
Perfect. Yeah.
So I think it's a time so often. In fact, I was on a call yesterday with a potential client, and they basically just wanted to replace the existing executive director, sort of same profile. And I said, hold on a minute.
Hmm.
Let's look at the climate today. Let's see where your agency wants to go. And is that the profile we really want to hire?
Yeah, right. Good
So
questions to ask.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yes,
that makes a ton of sense. No, I appreciate you saying that. I go back to the earlier comment about being penny wise and pound foolish
yes.
with the investment. You know, are you really going to sacrifice that extraordinary candidate because the organization can't see to paying $15,000 more? And that's maybe a bad example, but maybe it's not too far off
Mhm, mhm.
because of some pretty arbitrary range that's been
Right,
established or whatever the
yeah,
situation might be.
yeah,
It's tricky. It's very
yeah,
tricky. And I think also you help because you provide some guidance. You are
absolutely.
a guide. It's not just
Yeah,
you out there sourcing talent. It's also
right,
you helping to navigate the interview process, the
right.
negotiation process.
Hmm.
And there's so much more that's involved in hiring practices than just
Hmm.
putting together a job description and posting it and
Right.
crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. And I
Yes.
think that's one of the
Yeah.
misconceptions that a lot of people have is like, if we only put together a great job description,
Mhm,
if only we posted in the right places,
mhm,
you know, all of our problems are solved. And then you run into the challenge of, you know, this idea that you're going to have a panel of 18 people interviewing someone in their first meeting, right? Or whatever the nightmare scenario
right.
is.
Yeah.
So
Well, the
anyway,
biggest challenge, I think the biggest challenge of running a posting is that you have to manage a lot of noise that you don't want to manage
right. Good
because
point.
you get thousands, a lot of resumes. I mean, that they're not qualified for the job. And
Yeah.
you spend your whole time managing the people that are not qualified instead of focusing your time on the people that are qualified for the job. So we find, I mean, postings can provide, I call the golden nugget, which is sometimes you get a really good candidate from a posting, but it's
Sure.
rare. It's rare
Yeah.
when you compete. I had a conversation with a candidate the other day with, you know, in many of our searches, we have internal candidates.
Right.
And she asked me, and I was quite frank, she asked me, you know, if how often do we hire an internal candidate? And quite frankly, we don't hire an internal candidate very frequently because, you know, we go out to the market. So, um, you know, it's a very sensitive issue. We're dealing with a lot of people's sensitivities during this process, but postings in general um, create a lot more work than is necessary.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. I understand. Yeah, it's good advice. Well, I think we're starting to dig into the topic of our webinar conversation today, which is around sort of the 10 things individuals and
Right.
organizations should know about using search, hiring practices for executive search in
Mhm,
the nonprofit
mhm,
space. And you were kind enough to walk us through the 10 things on a um, member presentation that
mhm,
we put together, and I just found that it was so helpful that I thought it would be great to go through those in a more
mhm.
expanded way on this webinar. So I'll guide us through this, and maybe you can speak into each of these 10 different
Okay, sure,
points. I
absolutely.
know each of them is going to provide some good guidance and advice that hopefully are strong takeaways for the audience and might unlock some secrets and some opportunities that help them hire better people,
Mhm,
retain people, do whatever
mhm,
the case
mhm,
might be. But um, it touches on the first one. It touches
mhm,
on the subject you already opened up for us a little bit
mhm.
earlier, which is creating an equitable process.
Right,
So, if you could tell us a little bit about what you mean there for number one,
right.
which is that equitable process.
Yeah. It's imperative that every candidate goes through the same process as everyone else.
Okay.
From the very beginning of the search, um, we have to be careful that people fit, well, it's important that people feel that they're being treated well and they're getting the same evaluation process as everyone else.
Right.
But even if you don't use a search firm, and particularly if you don't use a search firm and you have internal candidates, sometimes they skip some of the processes because you know them already.
Yeah,
And
right, right, of course.
that is not advisable. You're opening up yourself to, obviously in the recruitment industry, we're very aware of being equitable. Make sure whether you're using a search firm or not, that everyone goes through the same process, and that they're measured in the same manner by the same people.
I love it.
Yeah. So that everyone meets with the same people and the same questions are asked throughout the process. A lot of times you can put a scoring process in place
Okay.
based on the competences of the job. So that's really important.
That's good. Great advice. And so important to avoid any trouble that you can get yourself into,
Right.
of course. The second recommendation is about who in the organization gets to interview and gets to sort of select the candidates. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, particularly for a CEO for a nonprofit, there are guidelines from your bylaws. Usually the board of directors has the fiduciary responsibility to hire and fire the CEO. And a lot of times you have long tenured leadership teams that feel that they should be making that decision. So, but we do want their involvement in the process. So typically for a CEO, you have you have a number of board members, which becomes your selection committee. And they do the evaluation of the candidates from a competency standpoint. But we ask leadership teams to get involved, to learn about to give feedback to the search committee about cultural fit, any red flags they see from that standpoint. But they're really not doing an interview on the qualifications of the person for the job. In other situations, you have a VP level or senior director level. In those instances, the CEO usually makes a decision. If it's a fundraiser, you usually like two board members from the advancement committee to give. And quite frankly, if I'm a candidate, I want to meet at least two board meetings. That would be my request. But they don't make the decision. The decision sits with the CEO of the organization. And again, they would meet direct reports, but typically they're giving feedback on fit and if they see any red flags, not on qualifications for the job, because they're not usually qualified to interview the candidate from a qualification standpoint.
Yeah, that makes sense. The third area is that you speak to the importance of developing the right position description. And what advice would you give everybody?
I mean, again, I think I touched on it a little earlier in the fact that don't just assume you're replacing the same profile as you had before. It's an opportunity to look at your org chart, to also look at your strategic plan. What are the goals in place? And I think particularly when you look at fundraising, there are certain goals usually in a strategic plan, big goals, and make sure those are reflected, not specifically the goals in the position description, but the competencies that lead to that goals. And sometimes that's kind of overlooked. So I think the main thing about a position description is really including the key competencies of the position, because that is how you're able to measure the qualifications and how they fit with the candidate.
That's good. That's great. Where do you line up on this debate about the sort of selling of the organization to a candidate versus the, sharing the details of the job, right? Is this about marketing the organization to the candidate, or is this about sharing information that helps the candidate determine if they are right for the job? How do I think about that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Chris. I mean, it's all of the above, to be honest with you.
Good.
The position description, when you use search firm, we sizzle up the position description. What
Okay.
we put all the marketing pieces. So if we work with a client, we go in, we meet with the board, we meet with the team, we experience the program so that we can really sell the opportunity. And that's the sizzle, kind of the front end of and by the way, you know, every organization is not perfect. So we give the good, the bad, and the ugly. They may be in a
Okay.
turnaround situation, and that's okay because, some people like turnarounds, some people don't. But that's going to be in our sizzle is like it's an opportunity to turn around. We're looking for a turnaround. So that's the
Right.
sizzle piece. And then the position description itself is really touching on the key competences of the job. Our role, our role, I our role is to sell the opportunity, but our role is also, we give them all the information they need to make a decision up front because we don't want to waste anyone's time. So, because there are challenges, there's sometimes challenges with a leadership team. Sometimes there's budget challenges. Sometimes, there's a whole host of things or change management they may be going through or need to go through. So we engage and we sizzle at the beginning to engage a candidate. But, once we have a serious candidate, we want to make sure. And even if they're not going through a search firm, I can't tell you how many times I talk to a candidate or a person that's accepted a position in a nonprofit and they had never seen the budget. Now,
Right.
obviously, with a search firm, we provide them that information, and we will provide NDAs, for confidential information where necessary. Ask them to complete those. But so often, I hear when they're not using a firm is, "Oh no, we didn't see the budget." Well, why didn't you ask for the budget?
Look,
Why are you now in this new role and you have to make payroll in 6 months and you didn't know
yeah.
about it?
Yeah. And it's not just the budget. There's so much critical information that a candidate in a senior level position should have access to, should know about. How many times have you seen where the candidate takes the job, starts, and feels like they were sold a bill of goods because
Yep.
what they were told is actually not reality. What was up is down, and what was down is up in this organization, and they feel almost bamboozled.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that shouldn't happen. So, well, one thing I always say is you cannot possibly know everything going into an
Fair,
organization,
fair, fair.
but you should know as much as possible. And so I give you an example. We did a CEO search for an organization where the CEO had retired and he'd been there 50 years. 50 years as a CEO. The board had no idea what was going on in the organization.
Right.
I told them I couldn't do the search until we did so I hired a search firm that knew that industry.
Okay.
I'm not a search firm, a consultant who knew that industry to go in and to do a full evaluation of the organization because I shared with them, I can't talk to candidates because I don't know anything about the organization.
Right, right.
So
And neither does anyone else except for the CEO.
yes, exactly. So it's so incredibly important, even if you're not using a firm, that you meet with different constituents in the organization to understand it. But it's tricky too because a lot of times you don't want a lot of people knowing that you're interviewing with the organization. So
Yeah, yeah, good,
that
good. Well, I
that
think it's good. That's a good perspective for the candidates themselves to have, which is, ask the right questions, make sure you're looking at the right documents, um, try to get clarification around some of the critical issues that I would think around, who do you really report to? What are their expectations? What's the board role in all of this? What are the resources that you really have? What's the budget that you really have? That kind of stuff.
yeah, and that's a lot of the due diligence we do up front in our process, and we spend a lot of time with the agency to really understand that because at the end of the day, you know it's not good for anyone. It's not good for the candidate, it's not good for the nonprofit, and it's not good for us.
Yeah,
So the more
good.
information you can share, the better. And if it's, and there's different times when you share information. You're not going to share it with everyone you talk to initially. But
Sure.
as candidates become serious, there's certain
Right.
times when you release information. And again, you can always have people sign NDAs to protect confidential information.
Yeah, right. Good. Yeah, and you um, sort of peel back more of the onion as you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about number four, which is
Yes.
developing the compensation range. I'm
Yes.
fascinated to know what there is to know about these compensation ranges these days.
Well, it's a sticky issue.
Yeah.
The
The
candidate,
stickiest.
it's sticky. The candidates hear the high end of the range, the clients hear the low end of the range.
Yeah, right.
And you probably all know in the last, I don't know, 3 years, you now have to state a range in
Is that
California.
just California though, or is that nationally?
I think it's a lot of states now. Like, I mean, I know they do in New York and other states, but you
Good,
have
good
to
to know.
state the range. And the reason for it is because, historically there has been, women are perceived as being underpaid. And so, we shouldn't be basing people's compensation on their previous compensation. So and it's a good reason for that. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons why that came into force. The challenge is from a recruiter standpoint, the challenge on that is putting the right compensation into the market. So we advise our clients heavily on, well, first of all, we look at GuideStar. So we have GuideStar's compensation ranges.
Right.
And there's other ones. There's AFP does one, and there's other. I will tell you, from my experience of over 20 years in this business, there's not one
Yeah.
of them that is spot on.
No.
Because again, it's supply and demand. And so um, it's always a little bit above, you have to pay a little bit above what's stated in these compensation ranges because you've got to attract talent who's already probably at that price range.
Yeah, so let's reconfirm this statement, which is the range does not mean it's final, right? Like that there's always the possibility of spending more as an organization than what the
Yes.
range
Yeah.
might suggest.
Yeah.
Yes. And so organizations shouldn't feel like they're locking themselves into it, right?
Well, legally, you are not allowed to offer lower than the lowest range posted. So if whatever your low range is, you have to at least offer that.
Okay,
When,
thank you.
when it comes to the high end, you don't, you can go beyond. If you've got a really good candidate and you want to pay an extra 10 grand above the posted range, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
What we find, I mean, everyone should be very conscious about compensation. I mean, you're a nonprofit, you have a fiduciary responsibility
You got
to,
a budget.
and you got a budget. At the same time, what we advise our clients is if you think you're going to pay 180, post it up to 200. And if you're using a search firm, I mean, you could do it with your own HR team too. And because you are not guaranteeing you're paying 200, that's the
Right.
range.
You
And
might think that you're going to be stretched and required to do that, but you're not.
yeah, you can, as long as you pay the minimum and offer the minimum, that's all you're legally obliged to do. So, and the reason we tell the market that is because if I'm a strong candidate, and this is for probably like a vice president of fund development. So I'm a strong candidate, I'm probably already making 170. So if the organization wants to pay 180, I may not even look at that. 170, 180, I can make 10 grand more. If it posts at 200, then
Right.
I might look at it. So what happens is when we want to be very transparent with our candidates and what we share with them is our client won't usually pay out as the highest end of the range because they need room to give you pay increases every year. But it gives us an opportunity to engage with a candidate and share with them. And many times they do go above what they wanted to pay because, they find a good candidate. So they will go up to that 200, but it just gives you more options. So
Yeah,
I
I love it.
recommend that you go higher on the high end, knowing that you don't have to pay the high end. And when you're communicating with candidates, because, legally we are not allowed to ask candidates how much money they make.
Okay.
And so we can only ask candidates what their desired compensation
Good
is.
to know. Good to know.
It's illegal to
Yeah.
ask for anyone to be asked, what are you currently making?
Yeah.
So you want to attract great talent, put it up a little higher than where you want to be and
Seems
people in the right
seems so
direction.
it seems so obvious until you actually have to put that number out there, which is so
Yeah,
painful for these
yeah,
organizations, right? But it
yeah, it is.
makes complete sense. Well, that leads into the next point, which is five around attracting a strong talent pool. So, money is probably a strong motivator for some, not all.
Right.
So that seems to be a good start. What are some of the other things that you would advise?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to be frank, whether it's us or someone else, even your HR team, you really should look for passive candidates.
Okay.
That's really, I mean, it depends on the position, but particularly for fundraising positions, you should headhunt for talent. It's absolutely critical. One of the things, and again, even if you're not using a firm, one of the things I think is make sure you sizzle the position description.
Okay.
So, what I found over the years, you're right, Chris, it's not just the money. And many times it's not the money. It's the culture of the organization. Does the board give or get? If you're a fundraiser, I'd like to know that. If there's a good, so you want to sizzle up the opportunity when you're attracting that talent. Um, is the CEO a great fundraiser? That's attractive to people. I mean, the mission in itself is, either if you're not passionate about the mission, then that's, you shouldn't be a candidate, right? So to attract a strong talent pool, what is culture is so important. And these days, probably one of the most important things is hybrid. We, if you're attracting a C level, a VP level, a senior director level, and you say to them, hey, you've got to come in the office 5 days a week in Santa Monica, um, you've just reduced your talent pool probably by 85%. Because if you're looking for leadership, if you're looking for talent that is accomplished, they probably already have an arrangement with their organization where they have some flexibility, and people want flexibility today.
Right, right.
So if you say to them, I advise our clients, if you say, well, you've got to come in the office 5 or 4 days a week, honestly, your talent pool's just been reduced significantly. Now, that doesn't mean, if you're leading a team, we need you in the office. And, a lot of times you're learning the business. So you've got to be in the office a lot at the very beginning as you build relationships internally. But I mean, if it's very, very hard to attract top talent. Now, if you're the CEO of, if you were doing a shelter, a homeless shelter or a program like that, CEO, I once had a gentleman say to me, Sarah, can I do it 100% remote? I'm like, well, obviously you're not a candidate for this position because you're overseeing a shelter and you have to be there.
Right. Sure. That makes sense. Yeah.
So, but that hybrid piece is probably as important today as the compensation.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to me because I think I recall you stating either on this call or another one the importance of actually proactively seeking out candidates as opposed to expecting them to come in over the transom or in response to
Mhm.
a job description or that kind of thing, right? So,
Yeah.
it would seem that nobody has time to do that kind of proactive searching. It's almost like
Yeah.
I'm doing that with my prospective donors, and now
Right.
you're asking me to do it with prospective candidates as well.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's why you use a search firm
Okay.
fundamentally, because I mean, for every search we reach out, we do fresh research to figure out who are the leaders in the space and who is doing well, because you can look at 990s and figure that out, who's growing the revenue. And
Yep.
then we put about 350 to 400 candidates in a target list in
Okay.
our CRM, and we reach out to them by LinkedIn, by phone, by email, by text, because everyone responds differently to different lines of communication. And
Sure.
we will reach out to that 350 to 400 candidates 7 or 8 times in different formats over probably, probably about 6, 7 weeks, because we want that talent. And sometimes you can do that through your HR team, but unfortunately, your internal HR team is usually very busy responding to a lot of applicants coming in, as you say, over the transom from postings that they have, and they don't have the time to source candidates.
Yeah.
It's really not in their job description most of the time, unless you're in a very, very big nonprofit.
Yeah. I get you. Yeah.
So so you can't, particularly for fundraising positions, it's very hard to find a good talent pool without doing that sourcing of
Hmm.
candidates.
Fair enough. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, what do we need to know about the internal candidates? I know that's number 6 on your list.
Yeah. So internal candidates, you have to handle with kid gloves.
Okay.
Um, and this happens more so with CEO positions and executive director positions. Usually there's a couple of, I would say in about 70% of the searches we do, there's one or two internal candidates. And sometimes they're pretty upset that they've used a search firm and gone out to search when they think, well,
Yeah,
hire
the
me.
perfect candidate, the one you've been waiting for your entire life is standing right here. How can you not recognize that?
Exactly, exactly. So and many of them are long tenured in the organization.
And probably threatening to leave.
Yes. So it's a very sensitive issue, and usually they're very good performers. They're wonderful people. They may not just fit that exact profile that the CEO is for that organization. And so um, it's really imperative that the board makes the effort of speaking with those candidates. They have to go through the same interviewing process as everyone
Right,
else.
right,
They
right.
have to be recognized. We usually go in and meet with them, explain the process, why they're going to search. Um, so there's a lot of internal candidates, a lot of times with executive director positions, and it's just really important that they feel heard, that they are communicated with extremely well, um, and but they have to go through the same process as everyone
Okay.
else.
And their
Yeah.
confidentiality has to be preserved.
Yeah, I mean, if we can get to them before they've already told everyone that they want the job.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Good. Good.
Usually
Good.
we don't even know. We're not even in the know at that point,
I
and they've already
laughed.
told everyone.
Yeah, I've laughed. I laughed too hard there because I've just seen it, right? It's almost
Yeah,
a marketing campaign.
yes,
Good,
yes.
good.
It can get extremely sticky again, if it's not managed well.
Yeah. Okay.
And you don't want your team feeling, you don't, it's so important that your team is engaged and communicated with well by the board of directors and nurtured,
Sure.
because
Sure.
they're good standing people that are helping run the organization every day.
And it's interesting because from my perspective, I find in a lot of key roles, the best candidates are often those that have been brought up through the organization and know the organization well and might even have been tapped
Mhm.
by leaders to grow into a particular role. Now, you would not necessarily find yourself in a search if there
Mm.
was
Right.
a identified
Absolutely.
internal candidate that's been groomed for a role. So really, it's interesting because you're brought in because that internal dynamic has not existed.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is that leadership changes.
Oh, gosh, yeah, of course.
So, board chair turns every 1 or 2 years, and so you may have been perceived 5 years ago by leadership who have now left the organization, or not in the same leadership positions. So it's one of the things I've learned from experience, a lot of this is you never promise anyone that they're going to get the next job
Yeah.
because there's always change in strategy, there's changing people in the leadership roles. You can never promise anyone. And we see that a lot. Oh, yeah, no, I
Oh,
was hired and I was promised
sure,
that I was going to be the next CEO. We have
sure,
that
sure.
all the time. And so the other thing is that the other piece to it too, is why we're brought in so often when there are internal candidates, because it's the fiduciary responsibility of the board to hire and fire the CEO. And they feel that their fiduciary responsibility is to compare and contrast with the market. That they feel that's their obligation,
Okay.
is to that they're not doing their job if they don't compare and contrast with the market.
Okay. Good. Good, good, good. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Um, so I think we've probably exhausted the subject.
Yes.
Maybe
I
we
think so.
haven't in terms of number seven, which is the information disclosures. We talked about the budget, et cetera,
Yeah.
but also NDAs. We haven't really talked about NDAs. So what in there should we additionally know that we haven't covered?
Yeah. As we know, a lot of information is public about finances on 990s, etc. Unfortunately, most of the public information is usually 2 years old. So it's really important that good information is being given to strong candidates. And in many of those situations, we ask the candidate to complete an NDA. Um, so that's talking about client confidentiality, client information, and we want to make sure they have as much information as they should have. This is a big
Good.
decision they're making. Why
Right.
would we not share information with them that they should know? Um, the piece then is for the candidate. So we we've been doing this for over 20 years. We know this market very well. Candidates trust us to protect their confidentiality. They do not want their boss to find out that they're interviewing for another job.
Sure. Sure.
So
Yeah.
protecting the candidate's confidentiality is uppermost and protects the integrity of the search. Um, the only time it usually gets out to the market that someone's looking at job B posted in the community is because they actually tell people themselves, and
Okay.
then
Fair enough.
those loose lips gossip. But
Yeah.
usually at the level we're working at, we tell people to make sure they keep it confidential. And that comes back to references. One of the big no-nos is, board member George can't call his friend Nancy at X organization and say, hey, do you know this person? And are they any good? Because that's breaching their confidentiality.
Right.
And um,
That's
and then
important to, yeah, that's a huge, huge way I think that most people violate that.
yeah, and
Even
it
if they say, listen, you can't say a word,
yeah,
but do you know this person?
yeah. And it is a breach. It's really frowned upon in our industry. And we do referencing, but we do referencing in a responsible manner. And we protect against that for our and the situation really, it hurts our brand because people
Right.
won't talk to us if
Yeah.
they know that we're not being strict with our clients. candidates won't trust to talk to us. So it impacts the pool. And if it gets into the market, impacts the pool immediately.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Well, we've got three more to cover, and I know the next one's
Right.
going to be a big one, or at least an
Right.
important one, and it's all about the interviewing process.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what do we need to know?
Wow, it's such a big topic,
I
but
know we could do an entire webinar just on the interviewing process, but
um,
I know you have some recommendations.
yeah, I would make sure one of the key things is use behavioral interviewing.
Okay.
And behavioral interviewing, so there's when you initially do an interview with a candidate, you're going through basic information in a Zoom interview. You're asking them, you're going through their resume, what are their accomplishments, et cetera, getting
Right.
facts and information.
Right.
When it gets serious, you go to behavioral interviewing, and that's where you really are able to understand. So when we meet with our client, we want to know, like, what are the issues? What are the issues you're facing? Perhaps you don't have a high performing bench or team, senior leadership team. So one of our questions may be, well, share with us how you built your senior leadership team. What were some of the challenges?
Right.
How did you measure the outcome, and what would you do differently? So I'm not asking them, did you build a high performing team, yes or no?
Right.
And
Right.
then, but one of my favorite interview questions is, in the last sort of year to 18 months, what was the biggest challenge that kept you up at night? And that takes you down a hole. It takes you into finance. It takes you into people issues. It takes you into, you learn all about, and how did they manage that? And what was
Yeah.
the outcome? So a lot of behavioral questions, really you can get into the success and the challenges they've overcome.
Yeah.
So when I prepare candidates for an interview, I say to them when I'm preparing them, think through what your accomplishments were, top 3 accomplishments in the last year. Or even say, what is your legacy? What would be your top 3 legacy items to your current organization? Like, um, did you grow the programming? Did you take it into another geographical area? I mean, how did that relate to the strategic plan? Did you meet those goals? So you're really getting into because a lot of people can sit in a position for many years and business as usual going through, and that's fine if you're a maintainer. But if you want to grow an organization, or then you're asking, questions around how they achieve those goals. So so when I tell them when they're preparing for an interview, think through what you achieved and think through the biggest challenges you've overcome and how you overcame those challenges, because that's behavioral interviewing, and those are the questions you're going to get asked.
I love it. That's so good.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
You had
and
talked
the
about measurement tools, I think.
Yeah, so a lot of times, going back to the position description, we talk about the core competencies. We then develop behavioral interviews around those core competencies, like managing a budget.
Okay.
Well, question for budgeting is, share with me when you were working or preparing the budget last year, what were the trade-offs, and how did you make those decisions about those trade-offs, and how did it affect your relationship with the program department as a result of that? So you're really getting to stories and into information,
Yeah.
but keep them around those core competencies, and then you can use. I mean, we use a scorecard, and you can weight that scorecard. So I want to weight finance at 20%,
Oh, perfect.
fundraising at 50%. So if I score somebody high on fundraising, so it's a weighted scorecard. And then again, this goes back to equity in the process, is that everyone's getting measured on the same competencies by different
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So
Uh,
it's really important. And the other thing is about interviewing. One of the things as an organization, is really important is how you show up as the organization.
Okay.
So many times, I mean, you're selling the candidate too. You want to be on time. I mean, otherwise candidates are going to go back to the market, talk about your brand, and you don't want that impacting your brand. The other thing I also say is a lot of times we have board members meet finalists of a CEO search. And so I share with the candidate, oh, you're going to meet the board. They're showing up for, drinks on Friday at 6 o'clock. And then only two show up, two board members show up. What message is
Right.
that sending to the candidate? If I was the candidate, I'm like, oh, so they're not really serious about this.
Or they don't like me.
Yeah, yeah. So it's really important how you communicate and how you show up for your interview as a
That's good.
client as well as a candidate.
Yeah, no, I think that's wonderful. And I know you could go on for days about the interview process, and we might need to reconvene. But
Right.
let's hit the last two. Number
Yes.
9 is references for you. What do we need to know about references?
Yeah, I mean, standard in our industry is again, you can't do backseat referencing. So standard is we ask our candidate, our finalist, for two former supervisors and one former direct report if it's a CEO position.
Okay.
Um, And when we do the reference, we don't ask for letters because, loads of people just write a nice letter. That doesn't
Okay.
emit
All right.
a lot of value. So we then do behavioral interviews with those references. So what was one of the most challenging things they faced in the last year? How would you
All
coach them? And we get consistent measure messaging usually through those, and we've got to know our candidates so well. It's a lot of it's very verifying, but
I see.
we do apply that sort of behavioral interviewing with the references, and we do a phone call or a Zoom, um, and most of the time it's verifying and it's as long as you got the right you see consistent patterns.
You
And
hope
if
to, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you don't, then you have to question it.
Right. Right, right, right. And are there situations where you don't get responses from those individuals and have to ask for more references, or generally
Yeah, yeah.
speaking?
Generally, because of the seniority of the level that we're working at, generally we don't have many issues, but there are times when they can't find somebody or it's too far to, we need somebody more recent. So we'll then talk to a board member or we'll ask for different references.
Yeah.
Um, but again, we can't ask for a reference from their existing organization because they're still employed. The other thing with references is, I mean, we're recruiting top talent, and a lot of times that talent, unless they're really close to an offer, they don't want to give references. They don't want everyone to know they're interviewing if they're not going to get the
Makes
job.
sense. Yeah.
So we only usually get the references at the end, closer to the end, because we don't have a lot of problems with referencing so much because of the people we're seeking.
Sure.
And they're
Sure.
already in a job, they've already produced or been successful. So we're looking more for cultural fit
At
for
that point. Yeah.
for their sake and for the client's sake.
Right, right. And I would imagine it's pretty rare that a reference was unaware that they were being put down as a reference. When you
Yes.
call them,
Yeah.
they're not surprised.
Yes.
So the candidate has done a good
Yeah.
job about making the reference aware that they'll be getting a
Yeah.
call probably from this organization or that
Yeah.
organization. Okay.
And
And
and the level that we're working at, the seniority when we ask the question about how would you coach them, you know,
oh,
talk about their
interesting.
last review, they're pretty honest.
Good.
They're pretty open. It's not perfect. I won't, I don't think a reference is. Um, but we're going to the right people. We're talking to the right people.
Yeah, perfect. That's great.
Yeah.
And well, last but not least is number
Background
10,
checks.
background checks. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you still do those, huh?
We do. Um, social media, that's a whole nother
Oh my gosh,
sticky
yeah.
area. We got lots of
Interesting.
sticky areas. Social media, we have to be careful about implied biases
Okay,
around
good.
social
Thank you for saying
media.
that. Yeah.
Yes,
Implicit biases must be something that
yeah.
is difficult
It's
to avoid.
our legal updates are asking us to be really careful about what we look at. So that it's still a bit of a gray area right now. I mean, we do some Googling, but you have to yeah, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. Let's just put it that way. And then the background check, you can only in California do a background check once you're making an offer to an individual.
Okay, so that's the step in the process.
You can't do a
Um,
background check unless you're going to make an offer to the individual.
and the background check is multiple checks, right? It's
Yes,
financial,
it's
it's
yeah.
arrests,
Usually
those
it's
kind of things.
criminal and credit.
Okay.
And then obviously if you're working with children, you've got to go through the local gosh, I've forgotten what it's called. But there's a special check where you do fingerprinting and everything else to make sure you're
Right.
not a sex offender or anything like that. So
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Safe
so a lot of
scan, all of
people,
that stuff.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that
And
makes
and most
sense.
of the time if you're working with children, the agency already has that process set up because they have to do it with everyone.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
Um,
Of course.
but usually they don't have the credit. The credit is so important because of, a lot of times they're handling money,
Yep.
um, and the criminal. And it's faster now. Usually they only take 2 or 3 days. They used to take weeks to do. Um, but information more available these days.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, before we navigate away from these best practices, I am interested in your take on some of the natural biases that certain clients would have, those that are responsible for interviewing. Do you ever find yourself advising them on how to remove their prejudices or how to remove some of their unconscious biases from the process?
Mhm. Yeah, we basically have a list of we have a list of them. But for an example, I was recently doing an executive director search for an organization that actually was not a religious organization, but they had a strong faith-based community.
Okay.
And we were in the interview, and someone asked one of our candidates if they would say a prayer before our interview started. And I had to intervene and say, I mean, it's not an IRS legally faith-based organization. So that is a bias and you can't ask people to pray.
Fair
So
enough.
it's very innocent most of the time. It's with the best intentions.
But that's
Um,
unconscious bias right there. Innocent, but real.
yeah, yeah. So
Maybe
I mean,
not always innocent, don't get me wrong, but
no,
often innocent, but real and a bias.
yeah, and we do have biases. We all have biases through our lives. We work
Right.
with through the experiences of lives that we have. I mean, it can be a bias that, a geographic bias.
Yeah,
That
particular organizations that a person
right,
went through in their life, a university or college
right.
experience, yeah,
I mean,
geography.
and the obvious ones are, language and gender and all the other ones that we uh, um, racial. But most people are very familiar with those.
Right.
Yeah. So we have a list. We remind people. I had one search recently where I was sharing with them. You can't say that; it's illegal.
Right. Yeah, I mean
So
that's helpful.
yeah,
You can
we
keep
have to
them
keep
out
them on
of you
track.
keep them out of trouble. Keep them out of trouble.
Yeah, keep them out and
Well,
myself out of trouble too.
yeah, of course, keep everybody out
Yeah,
of trouble, and
yeah,
I know that you do that often.
yeah.
Um, so tell me this. just some last minute advice. Now that we've kind of gone through the 10 best practices here, talked a little bit about unconscious bias, what additional advice first would you give to organizations? And
Mhm.
then separately, what advice would you give to candidates themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to organizations, a lot of organizations can't afford to hire a search firm.
Sure.
I'm always available for nonprofits to have a 20-minute conversation about some tips I can give them, and I'm always happy to do that.
Great. Good advice.
And yeah, and also, talk to your HR department too. I mean, usually they've got a very efficient HR department. My advice is don't settle a bit. I mean, the biggest one is don't settle, because if you run a posting and you hire the best of what you can find in the market, you're probably not going to have a very good outcome, unfortunately.
Right.
And
If you force it, don't force it. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's self-serving, but and that's not with every position, but with some of the senior leadership positions. So and also take the time to talk at the board level about where you want your organization to go, because
Perfect.
what you've hired before may not be. It may be great what the person's done and fantastic, but it may be, you may want to, it's an opportunity to look and see if you want to go in a different direction.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
might change the
Great.
skill sets. So that's the for the candidates. Um, well, always talk about, your resume is not a copy of your job description. Your resume should talk about accomplishments. When you're interested in an opportunity, don't send in the generic cover letter. You need to share your passion about their mission. And I can tell you a really well-written cover letter is exceptional. And I've seen it with my clients. When they read that, even if they don't have all the skills,
Mhm.
a well-written cover letter gives you so much grace with the hiring. So customize it, but also if you're not on LinkedIn, well then, I mean, you should be on LinkedIn. Even if you're not even looking for a job, you need to be on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Um, and people think they shouldn't be on LinkedIn because, oh, their boss is going to find out they're looking for a job. No, that's not the case. I mean,
Yeah.
everyone should have a very great LinkedIn profile, um, because that's how recruiters like me find people.
Mhm. Right. 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 And
So,
that's how you market yourself
right.
positively to others as well.
And with accomplishments, like if you've been working 5 years at an organization, I don't, I want to know what you accomplished,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Because somebody can sit in an organization for 5 years and not do, not accomplish much. That's, that's where you stand out. You stand out when you share that you impacted, you build a high performing team, you increase fundraising, you established a new program, whatever that is, whatever your function is, share those accomplishments. The
Terrific.
other thing I would say is one thing I would say that frustrates me most about resumes is I see I'm making up a name of a nonprofit, the Heart, I'll call it.
Okay.
And I have no idea what the Heart is. Is it $500,000 agency? Is it a $50 million
Okay.
agency?
Okay.
Do a sentence. This agency does this. Its
Hmm.
revenue size is this, and they have about 300 employees.
Right.
Then,
Great.
because titles don't really mean anything unless it has context.
Thanks. That's good.
Sorry, I can go on, Chris.
No, I know, I know, I know. And I'm glad you are going on because I know we probably went over time, and I'm just so grateful for the extra effort that you put into this by giving us so many good things to think about, both as organizations looking to hire and candidates looking to
Right.
be hired into these great positions. And you are an expert. You are amazing. I would certainly encourage anyone to reach out to Sarah. That 20-minute kind of advice conversation is something that I have promoted to clients when I was a consultant and encouraged others to just check in with Sarah and see what her readout is on the situation. It's really important to continually ask the experts, and that's one of the reasons why we created this webinar, the Nonprofit Edge, which is designed to promote purpose in practice. I hope we've accomplished that today. And again, Sarah, thank you for your time. And everybody out there, stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be coming out very soon. So thanks and have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for the Nonprofit Edge, a webinar series to promote purpose in practice. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation and learned some important lessons from our featured expert. We always want our content to be informative and to position nonprofit leaders to succeed. Please join us again for our next webinar. In the meantime, we wish you all the best and encourage you to learn more about Fulcrum Nonprofit Leadership by visiting our website at www.fulcrumleader.com.